meeting. I'm sorry it's having to be done virtually. Obviously, there are the problems of rail is leading to that. It does allow both myself and Martin to just appear before the Transport Select Committee, who are doing an investigation into transport in the north. So I hope we were able to make some good points in that. They're now interviewing the operators. Unfortunately, we can't see how that's going because we're doing this meeting. Can I just also say that Liam Robinson has had to stand down from Northern Rail as chair, and I'd like to put on record my sincere thanks for the immense work that he has done over his period in time, which has been really outstanding, and wish him well in his new role as leader of Liverpool City Council, sort of even possibly a more challenging job than the one he had doing Northern Rail, but we will sadly miss him, and a new chairman will be nominated in due course. And also to say a big thank you to Charlie Edwards for all the work he's done for Transport for the North, and he stood down, and welcome his new replacement as well. Okay. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody wishes to raise or register? Okay, I can't see anybody wanting to come in on that. Fine, thank you. Can we move to the meeting, the minutes of the previous meeting? Obviously been circulated. I'm not aware of any points that anybody wishes to raise on that or bring up. Martin?
There's just four very quick sort of follow-ups just to close off actions that were agreed by the board. At the last board meeting, you as a board emphasised the importance of being back on the programme board as a full member of the for the TRU project. There's some really positive conversations I'm having with Network Rail and DFT about how our contribution as TFN feeds into that, in addition to our role as chair of the stakeholder forum, and I'll be able to give a further update on that, I would imagine, at the next meeting. We talked at the last meeting about the social inclusion strategy. After your approval, that was sent out for consultation. The consultation closed earlier this week on Monday, so that's an action that's been completed. When you considered last time the financial update, there you agreed to publishing and finalising the statement of accounts, subject to a final sign-off on the pensions. That's all been signed off, and the statement of accounts the final accounts have been published. And a number of members expressed an interest about being kept in touch and being involved in the connected mobility, and we've had follow-up meetings with your officers where you expressed those interests.
Okay. Anybody got any other points on that? Phil Riley.
There's a reference to options to the Golborne link in those minutes. That's clearly something that's of great interest to those of us in Lancashire and Cumbria. Is there any progress, anything that anyone can report?
Chair, I'm not able to give you an update at this particular point on that. It's there have been a number of things which have obviously been slightly slower in progress because of the various changes over the autumn since you last met, but we will pick that up and follow it up with the department and come back to the board.
All right, thank you.
You've got some patience with me. I don't think so. That's good.
Right. Who's coming in there? Okay, thanks, Phil. Hans?
Yes, thanks for that. I think on the Golden Link issue there, because we've been under the impression that this has been removed from the programme and that you're looking for alternatives to the Golden Link rather than reintroducing the Golden Link. Can we have some assurances on where that's coming from? So we've been told once that it's been removed and they've got to look for an alternative to it, not reintroducing.
That's my understanding, Chair, is that's the position of the department. They have removed the Golborne link from the hybrid bill, and there is work that they've committed to look at alternatives, but we're not cited on the work. And as I said earlier, Chair, I think it's one of those things that's been slowed down because of various changes over the course of the autumn.
And more will come of that, I think, Councillor Mundy, when as it works its way through the committee stage in examination.
I think it's confusing if we keep referring to the Golden Link as if it's still there. So maybe we can probably look at our terminology, saying the alternatives to the route or something like that. Okay.
Point taken. Any other matters on the minutes that anybody wishes to raise? Okay, thank you. Can we move on then to agenda item 4? And this is the appointment of the Finance Director and other appointments. Martin.
Chair, you've got the report before you. I might, if I could, just invite Councillor Keith Little to offer a few words. I think you've got the proposition in front of you. Councillor Little was a part of the appointment subcommittee. Councillor Little.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, and good morning, everybody. Nice to see people. Yeah, I was part of the appointments panel, as was other colleagues. Peter was certainly there joining us. Very interesting day, very good candidates. But I am pleased to propose the appointment of Paul Kelly. Paul is an officer who's worked with us for some time now and was the present incumbent covering that post. So delighted to propose Paul. If would ask Peter if he would second that.
Very happy to second that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Little. Anybody wishes to come in on that? Any points they wish to make? The paper talks about other appointments as well, but the appointment of Paul has to be formally done. Can I ask then for I don't know how you do, a show of hands in so much as there can be, please? I would be grateful.
I think we're seeing hands and thumbs up.
Yeah.
Councillor Gittins.
Is it? Oh, sorry, Louise. Councillor Gittins. Sorry.
No, that was my hand up. I was putting my hand up rather than virtually putting it up. Sorry.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. There's nobody that's opposed to nobody to the contrary. So I'm very pleased about that. And Keith, I'd like to thank you and your colleagues for all the work you did in going through the appointments process, which is much appreciated. Can we now move to item 5 on the agenda? And the lead on this is Brian. This is the Northern Powerhouse Independent Economic Review. Brian, do you want to talk to the paper and then we'll take a discussion after that? Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have slides to share. So this paper updates you on the progress of the Northern Powerhouse Independent Economic Review Refresh programme, and I will take it as read. TFN has been working with Northern LEPs, your officers and wider Northern partners to refresh the NPIER and establish a set of economic scenarios for the North that will both reset the overall ambition for the North's economy by 2050 and provide a critical input to TFN's new strategic transport plan. For many decades now, the North's economy has underperformed most other parts of the UK, leading to negative outcomes for the population of the North. And this work highlights that limited progress has been made since the first review in 2016. And that gap continues to widen, and without policy intervention, it is likely to continue to widen to 2050. The ambition remains that investment in our transport system acts as a key enabler of improving economic performance in the North in a socially inclusive and equitable way that meets our legal requirement to achieve net zero. The 4 scenarios that have been modelled also highlight the importance of a wider range of policies and act as a framework for action. Beyond the Strategic Transport Plan and TFN's direct role, effort will be required to align TFN's activities and other areas of public policy, including education, skills, housing and R&D. And whilst transport investment can be a critical catalyst for growth and prosperity, it is a combination of investment that is needed across policy areas, including digital and energy infrastructure, to meet the climate challenge. As the paper sets out, we're proposing a wider discussion about these issues at the Convention of the North in January. The immediate next steps include finalising the model outcomes at the level of the North, and these will then be disaggregated to each LEP area in early January. At this stage, we ask the board to note the emerging findings, and in particular the lack of progress closing the performance gap between the North and the rest of the UK, and to call on government to urgently invest in the North's connectivity. Thank you, Chair. I'll hand back to you.
Okay. Comments? Anybody wishes to come in on this? Nobody. Andy Burnham, can...
Yes, thanks, Chair. Morning, everybody. Just to say, I think it's a really important piece of work, and well done to everybody who's been pulling it through. I just wanted to make a sort of minor point really about its connection to the Convention of the North. That's coming on the 25th of January. And I think it's really important that we just use that moment to, in some way, show that this work is coming and build the profile, because this is a really significant piece of work. I remember the 2016 review. I used heavily, actually, when I was kind of building the case for what we were going to do here in GM. So, you know, let's just think what is the level of engagement at the convention and what is said about this review at the convention. I think it would be a missed opportunity, I think, Chair, if we didn't position it as sort of, you know, a kind of a piece of work of fundamental importance to us all. Thank you.
I'm sure that will be the case. Perhaps we can talk about the way in which it's going to be presented at the convention later. I've got Mark Rawlinson wants to come in, and Keith Little wants to come in as well. Mark, first.
Thank you, Chair. And just to echo what Andy has just said, and I think everybody knows that I have a bit of a repeating theme, that I say that one of the golden threads that which we ought to really focus on is this economic issue around transport, and using that as one of the key messages in absolutely everything that we do, because it justifies what we want to achieve. So the use of that message just needs to be continually reinforced by this hard evidence. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Keith?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to make sure that we have the engagement with the local stakeholders and our partners, such as the LEP, of course, which we've just heard from, to make sure that the local considerations are adequately reflected in this important piece of work.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to come in on that? Don't see anybody else. Okay. Right, thank you, Brian. I think the message is, you know, all steam ahead to the 25th of January for the Northern Convention and presentation thereafter. So thank you for the work that's been going on that, and let's take it forward. Can we then move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is the STP? Lucy, are you talking to this?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. So this paper builds on steers we've had from board to date. It's also important for members to know we're working extremely closely with your officers on the detail, and appreciate all of the feedback we've received so far to kind of get it to this point. If I may, there's a few kind of key messages I want to draw out from the report before we kind of open it up for discussion. So section 2 of the report sets out what we're asking members to do. So that's to endorse the proposed overarching narrative for STP2 set out in section 4, to agree the proposed key priorities and messages set out in section 5, and to note the next steps set out in section 6. So I'll just draw out a couple of those key messages before we kind of open it up. So paragraph 4.1 of the report identifies our overarching narrative for STP2. So specifically, reinstating that unlocking the economic potential of the North should continue to be a priority for the UK. That investment to improve connectivity is fundamental to realising the North's economic potential, reducing social exclusion and improving quality of life. And that transformation of the strategic connectivity between the North cities and towns through the full Northern Powerhouse rail proposal must be complemented by investment in integrated local transport solutions that will be driven through your own local transport plans that are being developed. Paragraph 4.2 of the report also details the principles we'll use to support implementation of the framework set out in STP2, and that picks up on the themes and focus of this board's previous agreed Northern Transport Charter, which I know a number of members were involved in developing, and touches on the principles around a devolved regional budget, as well as having that kind of programme approach and systems approach to funding transport, particularly to deliver the step change needed to achieve the outcomes we want to see. And then section 5 of the report provides a reminder to members on the basis which we're preparing the draft STP. So previously agreed by boards, that's the structure that we worked through with yourselves and your officers previously. So while I don't intend to discuss the detail of that today, members do need to be comfortable with that as the foundations of drafting STP2. And then finally, section 6 of the report identifies the next steps, and I'd just like to kind of provide a little bit more detail on that. So our plans in terms of next steps are to share a full working draft of STP2 with your officers before Christmas. And officers will have an extended period into mid-January to consider and provide initial feedback on that full comprehensive draft. Simultaneous to that, we will be undertaking our main integrated sustainability appraisal assessment, and that's a key kind of part of the process that we have to do to make sure our plan's considered sound. And we'll receive all of that feedback back at the same kind of time, and we'll have a bit of time to refine the paper based on that feedback before we look to issue a full draft back to members and to officers in the middle of February. So again, giving us a further month before board to engage with you and with your officers, just to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the detail of that. During that kind of period, mid-February as well, we will also be taking the detailed draft through partnership boards, scrutiny, and we'll also be having a separate session with the Department for Transport to ensure they can appropriately brief their ministers on what we're wanting to say. And then, as you know, our plan is to get that full draft back through board in March, hopefully to kind of be endorsed so that we can do our full statutory 12-week consultation over the summer next year. So the papers for that and the full draft need to be prepared and finalised by the 15th of March, ready for the board papers being circulated. That was all I wanted to say, but would really welcome thoughts, comments, questions from members.
And if I might just, Chair, just to add, what we'll also bring to you is a comprehensive outline of the comms and engagement that will underpin the consultation process. We'll look there to build upon some of our experience with some of our other consultations members, maybe where we used a virtual consultation room for the freight and logistics strategy. We'll look to maybe build upon that experience as well as set pieces.
Okay, right. Thank you, Lucy. I think you've set out the timetable incredibly well, and the consultation that will be going on between now and then. It's not something that's going to sort of appear as a surprise to anybody. There's a lot of work going into this, and it is right that that consultation takes place. Does anybody particularly want to make comments on the general direction which we're going? Mark, I can see you first, and then dare say others will want to come in on this. Mark.
Okay, and thank you for the piece of work. It's obviously incredibly thorough, etc. Can I just pick up a couple of things on the agenda briefing paper? Under paragraph 4.2, we refer to simplification of funding streams. I just wonder whether there is an opportunity to bring in there simplification of procurement as well. Because sometimes different methods of procurement can create barriers to progress, and I just wonder whether that might be referred to. Under 5.1 paragraph D, we talk about impact, and we refer to government, local transport authorities and the transport industry. I just wonder whether we could reference the private sector in there as a more generic sector to be engaged with as well. And then just a final plea, for the finished report, can we please have an exec summary at the front of it? The exec summary is contained in the agenda briefing paper, so it's not an additional piece of work. But I just wish we could have some clarity of messaging at the front of the report, and sort of that goes as a more general comment throughout. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Those are very useful points. Councillor Gittins.
I'm not sure I was first on the list, but I'm happy to just jump in. Just on building on what Mark has said at 5.1D, where we talk about setting out how TFN will work with government, local transport authorities and the industry. Can we include something around devolved nations? Because I think, I always talk about how we're working with Wales and same with Scotland. So if we could just have that included somehow in that sentence, that would be great. But thanks, Lucy, for all the work you've done on this.
Thank you.
I think it's Lucy next. Lucy Winskull.
Oh, sorry, Lucy Winskull. Sorry, I didn't see you.
No worries.
Sorry.
No worries. Lucy Winskull, Chair of the North East LEP, basking in sunshine, as my North East colleagues will know. Like the paper previously, this is really welcome, and the business members of the North East LEP support this. I just wanted to put in a particular plea on operational issues. Refers also back to the point in the previous paper about the need to encompass education and training. The reference to the Academy for the North, I think, is incredibly welcome and to be encouraged. And within the North East, we have 2 facilities already that could provide a platform from which one could build. The Nexus Learning Centre in South Shields and the Gateshead College Rail Academy in Felling on the outskirts of Gateshead, and no doubt others on this call will be familiar with that. But I guess the message is don't reinvent the wheel, build on a strong platform already. But this, like the previous paper, is very welcome and very much support the direction of travel. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Lucy. Mayor Burnham.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Lucy for her presentation. She touched on the point that I wanted to raise, and I think this is the area where I think the greatest clarity probably would benefit us all, Chair, and that's between strategic transport planning and local transport planning. Because I think as a body, TFN now really needs to be clear about the separation of these 2 things. It's relevant for us, obviously, because as we go into 2023, Greater Manchester will start creating the B network. So we will see the first franchise buses land in the second half of next year. And then we're on quite a tight delivery time frame to the completion of it by the middle of the decade, so early 2025. So for us, that it becomes quite real, actually, the change. And then our aspirations are to bring in rail in the second half of the decade. And we're in conversations with the government at the moment through the Trailblazer process, which is about a new devolution deal, as to what that means and what it means in the context of GBR. So those issues are becoming very, very kind of real from our perspective. And I think just kind of understanding where local ends and strategic starts, for me, is going to become really important. So, as you know, Chair, I'm a strong supporter of this organisation, and recently made the point to the Secretary of State, actually, that Transport for the North should be given sort of preeminence again over, and the Northern Transport Acceleration Council didn't achieve anything as far as I could see, and really TFN needs to be used as a body where, amongst ourselves, we decide, we compromise over strategic priorities, and we come up with plans that work for everybody, and we make the case for strategic infrastructure, and obviously we monitor the way services are running across them. So, but I just don't think let's not shy away from this, because I remember when we were discussing integrated ticketing, I felt we kind of got muddled between local and strategic, and consequently, didn't progress that in the way that was helpful. I think, it's really important, I think, to recognise the city regions and obviously the rural areas as well as kind of as the foundations of the system that TFN builds above, if you like. But then being really clear about how we work in partnership and we support each other. But I think from our side, I think we feel that further work should be done to clarify what is local or city regional, and then what is strategic. And I think that separation would help us all then in thinking about clarifying the role of TFN that might then obviously kind of strengthen its position vis-a-vis the government and the Department of Transport. I hope that's helpful, Chair.
No, absolutely. Devolution isn't something that then goes to a regional level that doesn't feel very local if we're not careful. And I think that's certainly where I'd agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't see anybody else wanting to come in on this particular matter. Obviously, the work, as Lucy quite clearly explained, is ongoing, and consultation will also be ongoing. And this will form, I think, quite a central part of the meeting in the 23rd of March for us to discuss. Martin, do you want to say anything on that?
I think, Chair, if I can just check with the board that they're with those comments that have been made, and I think the comments from Mayor Burnham are helpful, and I think that's something, yes, we need to be clear about. Where's the added value? What's the strategic, and where is it support and complement the local and the city regions is important. But can I just check, are the board comfortable that taking on board all the comments that we've had so far today, we'll kind of work those into the narrative, and but they're comfortable with the direction of travel here, and they're comfortable with the key priorities and messages, subject to those.
Basically seeing overall agreement. Keith, yeah?
Yeah, I think just from a Crumley perspective, the rurality is car still king, and let's not forget about we have to travel long distances to get some of our services that are not on our doorstep.
Okay, fine, thank you. Obviously, ongoing work on that, and more to deal with your officers, and a final discussion at the next board meeting in March. Right, can we now move on to David to take us through his paper, item number 7, which is the future of rail in the north. As I say, both myself and Martin have just come from the Transport Select Committee where we were giving evidence, and we were along with Anthony Smith and
Jen Wilkinson from the Financial Times.
Jennifer Wilkinson, and it will be quite interesting to see what the operators say after us. Okay, David, are you ready to talk?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So you've got the report in front of you. Just to say, it covers 3 things actually. Obviously, the current performance issues, but also the case for investment in rail, including NPR in full, and then rail reform and funding, which is all interlinked really. So the background to this is we've been regularly outstripping growth back post-COVID and demand in the north. Northern, for example, reported their 3rd best week ever on revenue in the autumn. But obviously, the growth is being jeopardised by the unacceptable levels of performance we've been seeing over recent weeks and months, particularly on Avanti and Transpennine Express. We've actually done some calculations that are reported in the report that shows the impact of those delays and cancellations around 8 million a week. If you look at the time lost and you look at the impact on things like road congestion as well, so significant impact across the north. There's no single reason for the levels of performance, but the COVID training backlog, high levels of sickness, the ongoing multiple industrial relations issues are all kind of taken away from the flexibility to deal with the day-to-day issues. Just highlight one thing as well, that the growth back in particular has been in leisure and actually at weekends as well, and Sundays. but neither Northern or TPE are able to offer a full service on Sundays at the moment because of ongoing issues and lack of flexibility. So the market's changing, but the service isn't able to respond. There was some good news that Northern did manage to resolve a long-running dispute around rostering in the northwest, and that did have an improvement on cancellations from October onwards. We have the new timetable come into play on Monday. As a reminder, that was implementing the changes recommended by the Manchester Task Force, and also worth emphasising, it was restoring a significant number of services that were cut earlier in the year. Avanti, Northern restored a very significant number of services back, particularly in the east. TPE did restore some, but obviously they pulled back on some as well. Monday itself was very atypical day, really, because passenger numbers were lower with all the strikes happening. The operators reported no particular issues around the infrastructure or the structure of the timetable, but obviously there were a very high level of cancellations on the ongoing issues, particularly on TPE, carried forward into Monday. But for most of this week we have no or very little service operating across most of the north. So the committee spoke to the rail operators at their last meeting, and following that there were meetings with the Secretary of State, both TfN and obviously the Northern Mayors as well. One of the things that came out of those meetings with the Secretary of State was a revised mandate around the rest day working to restore some more flexibility. There's been no agreement on that yet, but there was some movement, as I say, after the meetings that took place. There's also been some very positive support for the idea of the Rail Academy that was mentioned earlier. So whereas the rest day working is a short-term fix, the Rail Academy is the long-term fix to the, or part of it, to the underlying issues of staffing, etc. Now, obviously, many of the performance issues are operational short-term, but I think the board will be very familiar with performance in the north, even before 2019, was significantly lower than other places across the country, and some of that is down to the lack of infrastructure and investment, and that's why, for example, the timetables had to be reduced back in the Manchester area in this week's timetable change. So the report invites the board to restate the support for Northern Powerhouse Rail in full. It also confirms the fact that following the change in government, we are now back to the IRP version of Northern Powerhouse Rail, the one that doesn't meet the board's requirements. And obviously, as the report says, it remains the view of the board that the long-term transformational growth can only be supported by the NPR network in full. We're also asking the board to highlight the importance of bringing forward plans around Bradford for the station there, and actually publishing the terms of reference for the Leeds area study, which is about connecting Sheffield and Leeds into the eastern leg of high-speed rail, which we're still awaiting for. Many of the problems, I think, the committee were very, very familiar that we've seen recently. Just go back to the fragmented nature of the rail industry. We've obviously had the rail reform proposals coming forward. There seems to be a bit of a pause on that, and the legislation isn't going through at the moment. Although I have to say, I have had a meeting with the Great British Railways transition team this morning. They do want to continue to engage with us, and we're going to be engaging with them in the early part of next year on a proposition for the North. But in advance of that, we are suggesting to the board, and the committee has looked at this, that there are a number of things that we can just get on with in the North that start to address some of these issues. In particular, the double devolution, addressing the point I think Mayor Burnham made earlier on about giving the city regions more say and more involvement in rail. We can do some of that through regional business units. We can do it under the existing Rail North partnership arrangements. We think we can link that to flexibility on fares and ticketing as well to support the city region network development, as well as some really good stuff that's going on stations in a number of parts, certainly Greater Manchester, but also West Yorkshire. I know are bringing forward some proposals on that, and we've done some really good work with Northern on stations as a place, and it's about implementing this in a way that works for the North. So taking some of these ideas forward with your support in a way that works for the North ahead of anything that happens nationally. The final point is around funding, and I think this board has spoken a number of times about this. There is a real risk that there isn't going to be sufficient funding for today's services, let alone the growth that we need to see. The board has highlighted that in previous meetings. I think it is really timely that the suggestion here, the board writes to the Rail Minister, the new Rail Minister, on this, seeks an urgent meeting in the new year, because there will be some short-term decisions needing to be made around this, and it's really important that through the Rail North Committee the board engages with the Minister on that, so we're not in the position of choking off growth for the lack of services. So, Chair, there's a number of recommendations, 7 in total in the report. I will not go through them all now. I think it'd be helpful to allow the board to have discussion and come back to the recommendations, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, David. Mayor Driscoll.
Thanks, Patrick. And thanks for the report, David. There's a lot of good stuff in there. In terms of the specific recommendations, can we recognise that in number 4, in terms of projects already in the pipeline, there's a number of things to do with the East Coast Main Line projects that are already in there that are quite critical. So we would very much like seeing those do. And I'll not enumerate the specific programmes, they're already well established in previous documents. And secondly, in terms of progressing at pace with need, can we please make sure that we always, at every juncture, mention the Leamside line, because that is critical, not just for us, but for rail across the north, because for us, predominantly north, south and east, west use the same piece of infrastructure, and we just simply can't get enough trains down there. In terms of the other points, the very good points, it's been mentioned a few times, the Secretary of State met with us, myself and the other Northern mayors recently. Did get a letter back from him yesterday talking about his interest in pursuing the Rail Academy for the North, which is good. What was specifically and noticeably absent in his reply is a point that I directly raised with him, which is the point that you've raised there about the rebounding of patronage in the North. In Newcastle, we're back up to 95% of passenger numbers pre-COVID. If we didn't have rail chaos, it would be over 100% now. So why is it the case that the northern operators are being asked to absorb all the inflation costs, real terms cuts in their operating budgets, which is the foundation of the failure to reach a settlement in the industrial disputes? Simply, the TOCs, the train operating companies, don't have the money available because the government isn't allowing the money available on the basis, on the argument that it's only 75% increased, 75% of the patronage pre-COVID, which is not the case for us. I said, can you actually just not have this simplistic across-the-board approach? He's not addressed that point. Now, you know what? We can live in hope that we'll get a Christmas present where he'll write to us and he'll say, Jamie, totally agree, there's your money. However, I'm not going to wait for that. Can we include that in all correspondence, please? And when we're talking about the future of rail in the North, there won't be a future for rail in the North unless we get investment into this critical infrastructure. And in particular, for large parts of us, there isn't a viable alternative other than heavy rail. Keith's on the call. If we go between here and Carlisle, there is one route. And because of a single derailment, there is a bus replacement service that frequently doesn't turn up. And when it does, the buses are not wheelchair accessible. Surely that is a breach of legal regulations somewhere. So these are the sort of things that really need addressing. And that comes back to, again, some of the things that are about the quality of service, because everybody, including the Secretary of State, wants to see, or at least says he wants to see, a better rail system. And when the government are refusing to allow a settlement that doesn't involve the push towards driver-only operated trains, that's a problem. I certainly want guards on trains because I think they are essential for improving public confidence and increasing passenger numbers. For people, an increasingly aging population, it's important for accessibility. And in an era where we're trying to do what we can, I'm sure everybody on the call, to make women and girls in particular feel safer when they're travelling, when we have at least 60% of our stations are unstaffed, the idea that people are going to have confidence in late night rail services when there's no guards on those trains, it just doesn't stack up. So if we could make those points as well, please, I would much appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Braben.
Thanks ever so much, and thank you for this report. I think it's really, it lays out the case. And can I say, I was absolutely gripped by the select committee this morning, and thank you very much for making the case for the North so powerfully. And Jen was also brilliant, I thought, as a journalist who continually travels on TPE. So the recommendations I really support. I think we could go a little bit further, particularly after the meeting with the Minister and the letter that we've received, because we did ask directly, and the Minister was we made it very clear that TransPennine is a particular problem, that the new timetable has meant even more cancellations than ever before, and that P-coding is not collected as data. TransPennine cannot continue like this, and we were very clear with the Minister, and unfortunately that we asked him to put TPE on notice. We've written to him as the mayors. Our letter wasn't referenced in his reply, so I wonder, could Transport for the North please support our ask to put TPE on notice, because we have no plan for recovery. We have no idea of how TPE are going to make this terrible situation any better, because their new timetable has collapsed. And in May, and it's a number of months now, they're going to potentially be given the contract for another 4 to 8 years. We have to have some identifiable markers of improvement, because, as you yourself said, Chair, this is costing the North £8 million a week in loss to our economy. So we need to see those improvements. I also want to put on record that TP's new timetable means that students travelling from Huddersfield to Dewsbury are now waiting an hour on the platform with the new timetable. It feels like the timetabling is not reflecting the needs of our community, and we have to close the productivity gap by making sure people can get to college and to work on time. We've got to have that transparency of that P-coding. That's really important. And also the need for the length of trains. Now, you'll know that the overcrowding on TP in particular, actually it's a health and safety issue. People with disabilities being rammed into trains in like some sort of Japanese bullet train, and it does feel, if you lean on the doors, you could potentially open the doors. So I think we've got to really get clarity on the expectation of the length of trains, because in London, if you have an 8-carriage train reduced to 4, it's slightly different to a 6-carriage reduced to 3. And there are fewer options, more cancellations, so greater overcrowding. It's incredibly worrying. We've got to make sure that we tackle that. And the productivity gap, we had that data in the previous items. I think that's something we could make the case for, that we will not close that widening productivity gap unless we tackle transport. So my request is, if we may, as Transport for the North, write to the Minister to pick up a couple more of those points, and particularly around the publishing of the terms of reference. It's now over a year and 2 months since we had a promise of that terms of reference. So if the board were minded to write to the Minister with those extra comments, certainly here in West Yorkshire we'd be very pleased.
Okay, thank you for that, Tracy. We'll come on to the course of action and exactly what we cover into the letter later on. We did, both Martin and myself did meet with the Secretary of State as well, just slightly before your meeting, and we did get almost a sort of possibility of the Minister coming to possibly our next meeting. So whether that can be arranged we'll see. But I think that would be very useful. Mayor Burnham.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I just wanted to come in strongly in support of Tracy and Jamie. And I think, Chair, this is excellent work from David and the team. Lots of sensible suggestions here. I would advocate turning them into the most prominent and important ones into something like a 5-point plan or something, because I think the northern public are now just a bit despondent and confused about rail, and they've lost trust actually in trains to a considerable degree. And I don't think there's a sense of the solution out there. It's just all a bit argument and finger pointing. And I think TfN needs to cut through this with a statement of the kind that Tracy was just advocating, saying that, here are practical things that could be done in 2023 to make sure that it's a better year on the railways than 2022 in the north of England. And I would suggest, Chair, that would be a good thing for you to lead, and I would hope we could agree something to that effect from this discussion. I would endorse everything that's in the paper. If I could just pluck out or emphasise a couple of the points made. I personally think Jamie is absolutely right to say that the issue of driver-only operation or guard should be decoupled from the present dispute. We went through this in the north of England a couple of years ago. I think it was 2018-19, wasn't it? Our railways are different. They're often the only mode of transport around. They're often running late, where people might have a difficulty with a connection or a worry about, is the station still going to be open when I get there? It's dark. It might not be as accessible as they are in other parts of the country. It is not improving the rail service to take guards off the trains. In fact, people would lose even more trust in the trains, as Jamie said. And I personally would strongly advocate that being added. I would endorse what Tracy said. Accountability needs to improve, and we cannot have this pre-cancellation tactic, because what it's doing is it's being overused by TransPennine Express. They're clearly using it, aren't they, as a way of evading accountability, saving money, and that's just wrong. They're putting themselves before the public in the use of that. And if they're cancelling services, we need to know the true extent of their cancellations in the official statistics and in terms of how they are then paid under the contract. I think we do need to have clarity on TPE. As Tracy said, they're up for renewal. This board, I think, should be making a rain check in February to say, are they fit for renewal? And I think we need to be really clear about that. The Rail Academy, you've been championing this, Chair. That is a fantastic idea. That should be and it should be an academy that all the TOCs have to work with, and is a coordinated approach. I would add into it, if I could, just a couple of future-facing calls. I know it mentions that the legislation is delayed. I think we should be calling on the government to expedite the legislation for Great British Railways. As I understand it, bringing together of track and train would just help with the running of the whole system. It would reduce the levels of fragmentation on the system. I think we should be supporting it, but calling for it to be expedited, given the crisis on the railways. And hopefully that call for us to be kind of supported in starting to identify B-network rail services that can start to progressively be introduced to our integrated network to get that local accountability and inclusion of rail within our capped fare system that we're developing in Greater Manchester. So I hope I'm not going over the ground that others have said, Chair, but I think it's really important that we turn this into a set of solutions for the railways in the north of England that has cross-party support here and could be sort of put out to our public so that they can see this body and us individually bringing solutions to the government to make next year better than this.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Mayor Coppard.
Thanks, Chair. It's possibly going to come as a surprise to nobody that I'm going to agree with Andy, Tracy, and Jamie on the vast majority of those points. So, very happy to sort of welcome the report, and clearly a good piece of work. I think there are, as Andy says just now, a couple of points that I think are really important to surface and focus on, not least holding the train operating companies accountable. It was supposed to be a high point, wasn't it? It was supposed to be a good news story, certainly in South Yorkshire, and some of the extension of services over to Liverpool, for instance, that we were supposed to see, and yet saw 105 cancellations from TPE as a result of that new timetable, or certainly coinciding with that new timetable. So making sure that we are and that TPE in particular are absolutely crystal clear about where we stand, and the voice of the North on this feels really important. On the training academy, and actually, as Andy just said, GBRHQ really sort of welcomed the training academy. Clearly, again, important for us to sort of push for that. I would obviously make the case for that in Doncaster. I can sense Jamie wanting to make the case for Newcastle, but I think on GBRHQ in particular, I know a lot of work went into that from various different parts of the country, Doncaster being one of them. At a time when we're facing the chaos we are, the idea that was kicked into the long grass just feels baffling to me, really. That absolutely should be a priority, and I think we should hold the government's feet to the fire on it, not least because they got so close to progressing with it. It feels important to not let it go too long before we get that back on track, if you forgive the pun. In terms of NPR, I think just, again, going back to Tracy's comments really about Sheffield to Leeds, and making sure that Sheffield to Leeds link is firmly established within the plan for IRP and NPR, and the terms of reference. The fact that we're waiting still, we raised it with Mark Harper when we met with him. It has been raised previously. Tracy and I have done a fair bit of work in the media on it. There is no good reason why that should still be held up. So the more we can emphasise that, please. And at the very least, get the terms of reference published, the better. So whatever we can do to make the case there would be welcome. That said, we'd also welcome kind of early action more broadly on the Sheffield to Leeds via Rotherham link and the Barrow Hill line, because we do want to see plans put in place ASAP, rather than waiting sort of for this transformational change in 2050. We need things to happen sooner. And then last but not least, and not something that's been said already, so important to mention, I think, just the idea of some of these cuts that are coming down the line. So, the inflationary pressures and the fact that the companies are going to be asked to take those cuts themselves, potentially 10% cut. We're already seeing what I would call concealed cuts to services. So, for instance, the failure to restore cross-country services to the North East and Midlands, which are incredibly important for us, I'm sure for Jamie as well. We're going to see that exacerbated, and I do worry about that, what that looks like, because cuts are bad enough, but concealed cuts are even worse. So important to surface that, please, and make sure that we are aware fully of what that looks like and the dangers of those inflationary pressures being passed on, because I think that could be disastrous at a time when it is already bad enough.
Okay. Thank you. Rob McIntosh. Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, David, for a very, very wide-ranging and comprehensive paper. I'd certainly echo much of what has already been said, particularly Mayor Burnham's points about just maybe focusing on 5 or so key areas which are really important, because there's a risk in amongst asking for so much that we miss the really important things. Aspects that I would think we should be focusing on are, particularly in the reform agenda, around fares and ticketing, focusing on more influence and control on the specification, and in that related to the service outcomes that Mayor Driscoll related to, and echo within that as well the local versus strategic layer of objectives that Mayor Burnham mentioned under the previous paper. I think we should emphasise the need for reforming working practices within the railway in a reasonable way. We know that we need to do that to increase the productivity of the rail system so that we can make every pound the railway system has go a bit further. And I think that would lead well into the college and creating a college in the north. And I know there's potentially a model for that, because there is something called an NCATI, which is a rail college that's in place in the Midlands. So there's already a bit of a precedent established there for creating that, and we should certainly be doing that in the north to address the very immediate issues we've got, but also the longer term investment issues we've got with the huge amount of infrastructure we've got to build and the skills shortages that we've got for that. That was all, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Peter Kenyon.
Thank you, Chair. I was very pleased to read David's report, and I support the comments made by all the previous speakers. And the recommendations in the paper focus on some really important matters: MPR, poor performance, rail reform and funding. My issue really follows on from Mayor Coppard's point. What's perhaps missing is the importance of some of our other Northern Rail operators and their part in the role of levelling up. So just widening things out, Cross Country provide interregional services serving many of the large cities in the north of England and elsewhere. And the only city in the north they don't serve is Liverpool. But the key thing is that they don't serve London. They serve regional cities. So in a recent article, which I read, the role of Cross Country and what role it could play in the levelling up of the UK and not just the north was stressed. The lack of any reference to operators like Cross Country in the integrated rail plan, when it does provide such an important, vital role in levelling up, or it could. The cuts that have already been made to its services, which Mayor Coppard just mentioned, with further cuts this week, and it would be helpful to if Transport for the North could have a look behind this to see what the nature of those cuts have actually been in the new timetable. I, for example, experienced the journey this week from Plymouth to Sheffield, where a train that used to be 9 coaches from Plymouth is now 4 coaches as far as Bristol. So that's a stealth cut. It's a sort of stealth cut we're talking about. So it would be helpful if we could identify what these stealth cuts have actually been so that we can actually address them head on. There's a sort of lack of real coordinate support for Cross Country. There's no all-party parliamentary group because it doesn't serve London, perhaps. There's no stakeholder group. So, Chair, I do think we should look wider than just TPE Northern and Avanti, which has come onto the agenda because things have gone so badly wrong. Perhaps start making the case for Cross Country and other interregional operators, and Transport for Wales is another one, as part of our levelling up mission that we're all on. So when I read the paper on the future of rail in the north, I didn't think it necessarily captured all the work we must do on the interregional operators, and I simply ask that the thinking on that is made a little bit wider, if possible, please.
Okay, I'll ask David to obviously comment when we come to wind up the discussion. Mark Rawlinson, and then Fiona, and then I'll ask David to give us a bit of a sum up as to where we are, and Martin. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I support the comments that have been made to date and the recommendations in the paper. The final recommendation is reference to writing to the Rail Minister, emphasising the importance of the impact on revenues, and that's expanded greatly under paragraph 3.23 under funding. And I think I've made the point before, but if there was ever a justification for our asks as Transport for the North at the current time, that is absolutely top of the list. And I don't think it should just be referenced in writing to the Minister. I think it should have a much higher profile in every communication that TfN does about this revenue point and passenger numbers, meaning that we justify what we do in very hard economic terms, and that if that message gets through to a much wider audience than just the Minister, then I think we have more advocates in the wider marketplace to actually justify our position. Thank you.
Okay, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just struggling to get off of mute. I just wanted to pick up on one point, which is hopefully a small point of reassurance around P coding and the fact that pre-cancellations of any form, that the data is collected for contractual purposes. It is reported to ourselves and our TFM partners as part of the contractual oversight. So that isn't lost. Obviously perfectly content if there's a desire to put it into the letter, but I wonder whether actually it's something that David and I could pick up as part of the partnership to explain how we oversee that piece of data, and also some of the value we do see in it in providing advance notification of to passengers of cancellations rather than on the day. I'm entirely content either way.
Okay. I think that would be useful. Look, I think we've had a very, very interesting debate and discussion over that, and some of the wider issues that came up. I'm not sure, Peter, whether there is much difference in overall costs on running shorter trains rather than longer trains. So I'd like to have a bit more information about that and get some more clarification on that.
Well, it takes
David,
2 train managers, Chair.
Yeah, on cross country, 2 units, 2 crews.
Oh, right, okay. Okay. Well, obviously, we'll need to investigate it a bit more and be a bit more understanding on the finances of that. David, do you want to sum up how you see where, as a result of the conversation, and what you think we should do as the next stage?
Yeah, I might invite Martin to comment afterwards, but I think from what I've heard today, we can summarise the points into an action plan. I think pull out the it's got to start with the recovery plans from the operators, and through Rail North Partnership, we have got plans, and we're monitoring plans, particularly around driver numbers, but also tackling things like sickness, etc., to short-term get the cancellation levels down, and pulling out milestones from those to hold operators accountable for, moving through the training academy, making some progress on infrastructure, more say locally about services timetables. We heard about the issues of not meeting local needs, how we can get some real progress on that in the next year, and then wrapping that up with sufficient funding so that we can actually grow the railway, because ultimately, as it says in the paper, that is the way to reduce the subsidy and reduce the call on government funding. But we need to make sure we have the railway that we need to do that and working sufficiently. So I think we can work that up into a much clearer offer. Yes, we are working on a protocol with Rail North Partnership around P coding, because we know that's an issue, and that's something we can share back with Rail North Committee to get consistency and clarity about how that works. The cross country point, yeah, this report just focused on some of the big issues. When we look at the strategic transport plan and our rail connectivity policy, we had a discussion with Rail North Committee members recently. I'll reassure you that covers all operators in the north, and I'll make a point though of particularly looking at what's happened on cross country and getting back to you on that, Peter. And then just finally, I think in this communication we do need to articulate that the market in the north has both changed significantly from pre-COVID, but also has huge potential, and we need to be able to adjust the services and adjust the operations to take full advantage of that, particularly the leisure market, the weekend market, and the more we can draw that out and show what we need and what we can do by working locally and adjusting services to meet that demand, adjusting fares. There's an offer here. This is about growing better and back, but also making the railway more efficient at the same time. So, yeah, very useful discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David, and thank you for the work that you've done in putting this report together. Martin, do you want to?
I don't think there's anything else I have to add to that. I think we'll get this letter to the Rail Minister ASAP sorted out. We'll get that 5-point plan or whatever, however we describe it, because I think that's part of selling the role and the importance of rail, which we can then use to also underpin our reference our appearance at the Convention of the North in January. And we've got the Rail North Committee in mid-February, which will be another opportunity to just track progress over the first part. So I think it's a really clear actual plan forward, Chair, and we'll take that forward at pace.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thanks for all the work that's been going on in that area. It is a tremendous effort, and we'll see what the next 6 weeks brings as far as restoration of services or not is the case, and we'll be able to take a judgment on that. Can we come on then to the item number 8, which is Paul Kelly on the business planning. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a brief update in relation to the financial situation within TFN and looking forward. So there's 2 main areas within the report. The first is on the current year, and lastly on the forward look in relation to 23, 24 and beyond. In relation to the current year, there are items that are reserved to the board, and so the financial performance we would update, also any modifications or changes to the budget, and also the treasury management strategy. So in relation to financial performance for the 6 months to September, we are, with the exception of timing issues in relation to transition costs associated to the cost reduction plan, we are on budget. There's no changes to the budget envelope, and we're fully compliant with the treasury management strategy. These are all detailed in the report, and I don't intend to go into them in any detail, but happy to take any questions on them. In relation to 23-24, we've initiated the business planning process and the budget process. This is in the absence of an allocation confirmed by the department, but the discussions we've had with the department are very promising, and we believe that they fully understand our cost base. Members will recall that the situation post IRP and the transfer of the NPR programme to the department, and we had to reduce our cost base, which we've done in 22-23, and we now have what we believe is a sustainable cost base going forward. The challenge now is to make sure that we've got the funding to match that sustainable cost base. In terms of business planning, there are 2 key areas. One is business as usual, which is delivering our core duties, and the other area is at the request of the department. We've explored developing the Centre of Excellence, which is essentially around providing services to LTAs and other STBs that potentially could be better value for money. The theory being, if we've been through the process and come out of it and done a good product, and why would we repeat the process within other entities when we can learn and benefit from our experience? We believe the information is, so our funding request has been, the funding proposal has been submitted to ministers by the department, and we believe that a funding allocation, which hopefully will be for a 2-year period, should be with us in early January. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any questions to Paul? I think the plan lays itself fairly clear. I can't see anybody indicating that they wish to come in on that. So
we do need to the board to be approving that.
I therefore need to ask for approval. If you could show your approval, please.
Good.
Looks to be fine. Thank you very much indeed. Right, then can we move on to item number 9, which is Tom's report.
Oh, sorry. I thought sorry.
Sorry. Okay. So we move on to item number 9 then, which is Tom Jarvis's report. And Tom, do you want to talk us through your report?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. The paper introduces the Transport and Health Policy position, which is attached as an appendix. Very briefly on the background, we've developed this policy to act on the research conducted with Cambridge Econometrics earlier this year, which examined the key impact pathways between the transport system and health, as well as the scale of these impacts and how they contribute to the significant health inequalities between the north and the rest of England. This included factors like air and noise pollution, severance, physical inactivity, and poor access to NHS services. We're aware through engagement with partners that significant work is already ongoing across the north to address these impacts, and in developing the petition, we've focused on the areas in which TFN can support partners and add value in this area. This includes adopting Vision Zero for deaths and serious injuries on the major and strategic roads network, improving evidence on the impacts of limited access to health services on health outcomes, developing a tool to more easily identify areas of severance on the major roads and rail networks, and developing a health impacts costing tool, which will expand evidence on the health impacts of policies, including modal shift, demand management, and clean air zones. We're also working to integrate evidence and actions from this policy into the next strategic transport plan, ensuring that health is considered alongside economic, social, and environmental impacts. And with the board's approval, we'll publish the policy position and the accompanying research report in the new year. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's a fairly substantial report. Any questions? Louise?
Yeah, just to say I really welcome this. I've talked about health inequalities and the impact of transport and everything we do really for quite a while. So I'm really, really pleased to see this. And many of us have signed up to become Marmot regions. So it links in the work that we're doing as regions. I know GM has Cheshire, Merseyside. I think there's some others in the north that are also doing that. So I really, really welcome this. But I suppose it's how we measure it and how it's sort of our decisions, it's integrated into all our decisions as we move forward, almost like, you know, how does this impact on health inequality? So I think that would be really important. But thank you very much to the team that's done all the work on this, and thanks for the presentation, Tom.
Louise. Mayor Braven?
Yes, I just to agree with Louise that this is incredibly welcome. And here in West Yorkshire, we've just agreed a target for 0 road deaths by 2040. And my deputy mayor is the chair of the Vision Zero board, because I've sat in too many living rooms of people who've lost loved ones due to a road traffic accident. 45 deaths this year alone, which is desperately sad for West Yorkshire. So thank you for the work on that. And definitely Vision Zero is really important for us. But reducing those levels of car dominance, it's got to be a priority, because we have low car use in West Yorkshire, 72%, something around that. But yet the most poor, the most those that are really struggling, that don't have a car, are often subject to the worst air pollution. So I really welcome this work, and I think it's something we should definitely widen and deepen.
Thank you. Mayor Coppard?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, similarly, really, just to welcome it. South Yorkshire has a healthy life expectancy gap of 20 years. So some dramatic health inequalities. And I am, as well as being Mayor, Chair of the ICP. So I'm really grateful that actually this is increasingly a focus for TFN and that we're going down this route, because I think it is an incredibly important part of how we address those health inequalities. You know, for instance, I am conscious that 1 in 20 deaths in South Yorkshire are related to air pollution. And obviously, clearly, public transport has a significant role to play in reducing that air pollution. So really just say thank you to Tom and the team, and you know, anything we can do in South Yorkshire to support that work or evidence that work. Really happy to do that, both from my perspective as Mayor and through the ICP. So an offer on the table as well.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Mayor Driscoll.
Thank you, Chair. And Tom, thanks for this report. It's a very good report. I totally echo it and emphasise that point about accidentally getting people to do a bit more exercise has so many long-term benefits. And actually, let's not forget the economic benefits are also the health benefits. Once you've got people to stop smoking, the best thing you can do for them is stop some money in their pocket. That's by far the biggest determinant of life expectancy, healthy life expectancy. The Transport North East team are already working on this. We've got a public health expert seconded into the team. I've had meetings with them, and I'm sure my colleagues have as well. And it would be very beneficial to work together on this and take advantage of your research and your resources. So you have our full support.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't see anybody else wanting to come in. Tom, again, thank you very much for the work, and I think the way in which we move forward now in the launching of this and sort of highlighting it is very important indeed. Martin, is there anything you wish to add? We've almost come to the end of our meeting.
No, just to say, Chair, and building on, thank you for the comments from the board members for this piece of work. I think we in the last 12 months we have moved the agenda forward so strongly in terms of transport-related social exclusion, social inclusivity, health and well-being. And I think what I'm keen to try and do as we move forward is see how we can push the boundaries on some of the appraisals, because we know, as we saw with the Transport Select Committee report on the Integrated Rail Plan, taking account of the community and the social and the health aspects are absolutely part of the transport agenda. So as we look forward to the new business year, Chair, that's certainly a very solid foundation on which we want to bring. But thank you very much for the support from the board, because that's much appreciated.
Okay. Louise, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just put something in the chat. Should we ask someone from Public Health to join the partnership board? I'm sure the directors of Public Health across the North, they're all mates with each other, so I'm sure they'd be quite happy to nominate someone. Yeah. I just think it would enhance the partnership board, to be honest. So I don't know what everyone else thinks.
Okay, that seems a reasonable suggestion, point that we should follow up. I'll leave that to Tom to work out how we do that. Tom? Okay. Okay. Right. That brings us to the end of today's agenda. Can I sort of thank everybody for their understanding in the way we've had to conduct today's business. The next meeting is Thursday, March the 23rd, which is going to be in Leeds. And depending on whether we manage to get the Minister along, but we've also got the wider strategic plan. Can I take this opportunity of thanking you all for your help and cooperation, and wishing you a Merry Christmas and a contented New Year. And let's hope, as far as public transport is concerned, a better New Year than the one we've just had in the last 12 months. And we can move forward with some of the other things we want to do and not get dominated on just discussing railway infrastructure. But thank you all very much indeed. Merry Christmas and see you in the new year.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you. Happy Christmas, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.